Hey everybody, Bobby Medina here with my good friend Paul Barron, and today we are bringing you a very special trumpet artist. His career as a musician and educator spans more than 25 years and has taken him around the globe to perform for audiences worldwide. Originally from Boston, Massachusetts, Bijan is a classically trained musician and attended the New England Conservatory Preparatory School, as well as the University of Southern California. He's a student of the great bands of the past and present and has become a highly sought after and in-demand lead trumpet player. Bijan is a lead trumpet player for a group that I've personally seen that are incredible: the Grammy-nominated Clayton Hamilton Jazz Orchestra, the Grammy-winning J. Diversa Progressive Big Band, the Grammy-winning John Beasley's Monkstra, along with Jose Rizzo's Jazz on the Latin Side All-Stars, and the late Gerald Wilson Jazz Orchestra. Originally, Bijan has recorded live as lead trumpeter with the Radio Big Band of Frankfurt, Germany. His recording credits go on for ages. I'll just say a couple of them. He's played with some iconic artists like Natalie Cole, Michael Bublé, Justin Timberlake, Harry Connick Jr., Diana Krall, Michael Jackson. This list goes on for so long. We don't have time to do all of that, but I can tell you he's played with just about everybody. He's a dedicated educator and an in-demand clinician, and he's given master classes and clinics to colleges, conservatories, secondary schools, high schools throughout the US as well as in Europe. And he also maintains a private lesson studio. He's also a Stomvi performing artist and uses the Stomvi line of horns exclusively. He performs on the VR2 custom Big Bell B-flat trumpet, which we'll talk about later, as well as their other trumpets, their C trumpets, their flugelhorn, and their piccolo. And Bijan also uses the Stomvi Flex mouthpiece system. So welcome today, our guest, Bijon Watson. Great to have you here.
Thank you and good night.
I know.
What else could I say?
I'm glad you did that intro, Bobby. I would have stumbled forever, as you could tell already. Well, welcome, Bijan. I want to ask you let's just back up to your beginnings, I guess, your musical upbringing in Boston. And I got to say, you're living in like one of my two favorite cities in the U.S. I love Boston, and my wife and I as well. So every time we go there, it's just like, it feels like home to me. So anyway, tell us about your musical upbringing there.
Cool. Well, it's great. First of all, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me. I really, it's always great to talk to some other trumpet players in the trenches, and we're getting it done. And Bobby, of course, is a good friend. And we, it's interesting how you have these relationships that you build over time, and they come about in weird ways, but the good ones stay with you for a long time. So it's really a pleasure to be here. So I thank you. So I grew up in Boston, or actually a suburb outside of Boston called named Sharon, Mass. And we had a great elementary school program there. And it's interesting when I do lots of clinics and master class, and people ask me that, my elementary school teacher, Mr. Baker, third, fourth grade teacher, was the one who really saw whatever glimmer of hope I might have on the trumpet, and made sure that I, tell my parents, hey, he really should be taking private lessons, and let's continue with this training. And so that really that positive reinforcement kind of what kicked me off to work. And I started out just like everyone else on the trumpet, Mary Had a Little Lamb and all that stuff. But if I was to fast forward a little bit through that, that was really the catalyst for me sticking with the trumpet. And I had a chance to attend the New England Conservatory Preparatory School, which is, they offer programs from beginning all the way through high school. They have all these, regional ensembles like the Mass Youth Wind Ensemble, the Youth Chamber Orchestra, Youth Philharmonic, and you can do what's called a certificate program there, where you go through all these take theory classes and stuff on the weekends and things like that, and all these ensembles. And that's really where I cut my teeth playing with, not literally, but playing with these other young players that were really interested in getting really good. and studied with some great teachers, Robert Pettipaw, who had been part of the, had played, was a local teaching artist there. And of course, doing the Tanglewood stuff with, with Charlie Schluter's there, and
Wow.
Charlie Lewis, right? And having opportunity to be able to go to those master classes and be, really be driven. And I came up during a good time too. I mean, Rich Kelly, I don't know if you know Rich Kelly, trumpet player. He and I were in the same grade, so it was great to be pushed by him and his amazing talents. And John Nelson, who was a year older than me, who had the Meridian Arts Ensemble. So we had a nice little crew of trumpet players that were really interested in keeping stuff going. So I was classically trained at that time, playing a lot of symphony stuff. And if you were to ask me what I would be doing at that time, it was going to be auditioning for an orchestra. I ended up going to USC, and where I majored in computer engineering and minored in music. And actually, that was one of the best things that could have happened to me in some ways, because minoring in music allowed me to rotate through the different groups. I wasn't beholden to a particular genre. So I might sub in the jazz orchestra one time, or sub in the wind ensemble another time, sub in the orchestra. So I was really getting a good wide breadth of training on the instrument. And it was there that, got a chance to work with Boyd Hood, and got a chance to, John Thomas, who was a trumpet player out there, Rick Baptist, all those people. And of course, being in Los Angeles at USC, that's the height of all this TV, film scoring, you name it, right? It's out there. So it really was an opportunity to get immersed in that. So that's really kind of how it was, those experiences, first of all, at New England Conservatory Preparatory School, and then at USC. I was also in the marching band. I was a drum major of the marching band for 3 years. So that was, it's intense playing all the time. And that was when I really started doing more jazz things and realizing I had lead capabilities. And, but I had to work at it, I wasn't necessarily a natural lead player.
A lot of people, I think they watch somebody like you. I mean, like, I've seen you play before, play lead, and it's spectacular when you're there. And I feel the same, like with Paul too, when I watch you guys do this. But most people, and I won't say most people, but a lot of people think, well, that guy, he's a big guy and he just he's got it, I just don't have the lip, or I don't have the air, or whatever. But I think it's important for people to understand that no matter the caliber of player, everybody's got to work for it. It's not like it's handed to you on a plate, and you didn't work hard to achieve it,
And along those lines, just speaking to that point, one of the other catalysts that really helped me focus on my lead playing, and I was in the Disney All-American College Band in '94 at Disneyland with Dr. Bartner, who was the director of that show band. And then in summer of '95, I had an opportunity to Disney Grammy All-American Jazz Band, which was led by Ron McCurdy. Nate Smith was the drummer for that. Andre Hayward played trombone in that band. Marco Paglia, who's a great piano player living in New York, does a lot of musicals and writing for that, was a pianist, young Marco. And so I was playing third trumpet in that band. And Tanya Darby, a young Tanya Darby, 21 years old, and Brian Scanlon out of Florida. Those were the split lead players. Now, if you know Tanya and Brian, they are, let's say, just diminutive in stature. They're not tall, big. In fact, Tanya had to have a box to stand on stage because she was, but she was playing lead. Her and Brian.
I've heard her. She's phenomenal.
Lead, I took a few, but they were the lead players. And so it was like, wow, I got, working with them. And we had a summer playing with Arturo Sandoval. We were back on Arturo, Joe Williams. We backed up Diane Reeves, Eartha Kitt, Ramsey Lewis, Rosemary Clooney. I mean, just a summer. And we were playing their books, Arturo had just recorded that Mis Abuelos album, right? Or I mean, it's not the name of the album, but they had that song. I mean, and so we played all the stuff off that album, and that's had some heat in it.
Yeah.
And, yeah, so anyway, so along those lines, that's, yeah, it was something I realized if I really want to do this, and something I'm going to have to work on and be focused and
Well,
understand how to do that consistently.
right. Well, let's switch gears a little bit because I'm going to throw something out here that we have never really asked anybody that we've interviewed, although we talk about it in our various groups, and we know that a lot of people have problems with it. And I've certainly overcome a bunch of issues. But have you ever experienced any issues in playing that particularly stand out that you've had to just overcome, or have you ever had an episode of like where you've just overuse, where you've just been playing too much and you've just kind of maybe hurt yourself or whatever? I know that a
Sure.
lot of people have. When we hang, with a lot of friends, we tell our war stories and we don't usually publicize them too much. But I think it's interesting for people to know in these groups because a lot of them are suffering through periods like that. And for some people, it can be really a downer, really depressing at times, when you just can't get it together. And so if you got like a little story you can share about something like that and how you overcame it, that would be great.
We're not going to show our scars or anything, though, right?
Exactly right. It's interesting. It's a good question because as trumpet players and lead players, and it's like you hear these urban legends about, well, I practice 8 hours a day, 6 days. You take a day off the horn, you take 2 days off the horn, someone else knows, and you take 3 days off the horn, everybody knows, whatever that's saying, and it's like, okay, all right, settle down. All right, first of all, if you're playing a lot, and Paul can speak to this on the road. I mean, even on the road, Clayton Hamilton, and I play 95% of the lead. That's just the old school thing. I come from the school of Snooky Young, that he played lead. That's what I did.
Put that hat on, and that's it.
Yeah, and that's what you do, right? And so you're expected to be consistent from the first note to the last, right? And so, yeah, of course, there are times when it's back to back, and so you have to learn to sense when your chops are really starting to get fatigued, because if you're not paying attention to that, then you can get into some bad habits and try and do some panacea thing that doesn't work ultimately. So with regards to that, so I was working on my car one time and bolt hit right this part right in my lip right here. And I was like, oh crap, and broke the inside there, and it was swollen, and I had to play this show, and I was like, okay, settle down, it's gonna heal, but the air was leaking out of the side, I couldn't really play and stuff like that. So I had 5 days before the show was about to happen. Luckily, I had a few days. And so what I did, I iced it down, I drank a lot of water, I hydrated a lot, and I just did mouthpiece buzzing, just to make sure that my corn, and feel where it was without changing too much, and mouthpiece buzzing in a mirror, so I wasn't making too many adjustments, because I realized if I started making adjustments based on this injury, I was going to change my whole thing. So I said, okay, let's calm down. Let's just take a look, see how it healed. And it started to heal, and it wasn't fully healed before the gig. But what I realized was I used a slightly larger mouthpiece. I used my classical mouthpiece. Luckily, the gig that I had wasn't like some of the pyrotechnic stuff required to play lead. So it only went up to it went up to like a G, a few times. It wasn't like some of these shows where I have to play it. Paul, you got to have those A's, you got to have those B's, B flats, A flats. Not my favorite note. Talked to Wayne Bergeron about that.
Yeah.
But I think his new horn, fixed that. I tried his new horn. It's awesome. Anyway, so that's a whole other thing. So that was an experience. And then another time was just on tour and realizing that, oh my gosh, if I don't slow down, so, and part of it was I realized is I wasn't hearing myself well in the room where I was. And I realized I needed to either have a monitor moved over. So we had, so making some adjustments there felt much better. And so it's understanding your surrounding and the environment, but why are your chops starting to get fatigued? Why, and also, on the road, Paul, I'm sure you know this, Bobby, you got to watch what you eat, what you drink. You go out, you have some fun with the boys and the girls the night before, and alcohol, you get dehydrated, that can really mess with your chops the next day if you're not hydrated and things like that. So simple things like that can really, and understanding your body can help you recover from those situations. Did that answer the question, kind of?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's just interesting for people to learn and to see how everybody approaches different issues. You mentioned one thing, and I think there's a group like in any kind of divide, there's always a divide, right? So there's this divide, where people are like, yeah, no, you don't want to take any time off because if, one day off and this and that. And then there's another group of people that seem to be able to take a ton of time off and then kind of come back to it. And so I was in that first group for decades, man, where I literally never took time off, maybe a day.
I mean, me too. I mean, yeah,
but I later realized I was at a Clark Terry clinic one time, and he had just come off, God, I can't remember the name of, what was the name of that famous music store in Santa Monica? He did a clinic there.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, okay. So everybody used to go there. So Clark shows up and he's got this beautiful gold trumpet and gold plated flugelhorn and just the nicest guy. So he's giving all this advice. And at the very end, he decides to pick it up and play. And so he's, picks the thing up, playing all of his stuff. And he actually dropped his flugelhorn. I couldn't believe it, He picks it up and luckily it's still working, plays a couple more notes and says goodbye. So I went up and chatted with him afterwards. And I did notice he sounded a little bit airy, a little foo-foo, but he sounded great. I mean, but he said, yeah, I've been on vacation with my wife and, I haven't played in 2 weeks, And a light went off in my head. And I just thought, you know what, man, this guy can do that, and I've heard Harry James, he could take a couple of weeks off and come back and, ripping. So I kind of talked about it with Bobby Shu, who is like my mentor still is, and a close friend and all of that. But it's sort of like, I think a lot of it's a mindset, at least for me, it seems it's more a mindset than the physicalness of it. Because after all these years, it kind of becomes like you have, your nervous system is wired now to do these tasks. It's not like you have to learn how to do them all over, So
true. I agree with that 200%. And I think that you have to, and I was, I just did a master class at Berkeley, talking professional development class there. And one of the students asked, how do you find that balance between finding time to play and personal life and building these things? And I said, well, you have to plan and make time for that. It's okay if maybe you don't hit the trumpet. I mean, full disclosure, I haven't played my trumpet in 2 days. I know that we got Thanksgiving coming up and everything like that. I'm probably going to play I'm going to play a little bit tomorrow, just some warm stuff. And then I'm going to I got run a shows to get ready for, the following week. And I know that over the weekend, I'm going to, start my regimen. I'll probably put in 2 or 3 hours a day, maybe a little bit more, just getting ready for that. I've got the music for that and take a look at it and just prepare. But you have to plan to prepare. And I think that goes back to mindset and having a vision of where you want to go, what you want to play, how you want to play. And if you don't plan that, then that's when you start getting drawn off into different directions that don't really help your playing at all.
Well, and go ahead, Paul.
Oh, and you mentioned about your, knowing your body as well. So, you've done this enough that what that ramp up time is going to entail, exactly. What to do and how much to do it and how to build it up. Yeah.
Now I try not to push the envelope too much. Honestly, during the pandemic was probably the longest time. Well, still in the pandemic, but during 2020 was the longest time. I mean, I took off, and I'm sure many of us have this the same story. I took off 5 weeks from playing the trumpet. Just didn't play. Didn't have anything to prepare for. There's nothing on the books. Everything was canceled. And so I was doing stuff around the house. I was doing drywall. I was doing, I have a 125-year-old home here in Boston. It's a historic home, so there's always stuff to do. And I was okay with it, oddly enough. I was listening to a lot of music. I mean, I picked up the horn, but I'm talking about playing, like, I'd say 5 weeks, 5, 6 weeks. And so when I came back off of that, it was like, okay, I better take it easy here. Better take it slow. Swelling came. But at the first like hour or so, I felt fine. It was weird. But
It's always that first bit.
Yeah. Then reality kicked in.
I took a month off one time without ever touching the horn, and this was years ago as an experimentation. And I went on a vacation with my new wife back then, and boy, I came back and I always thought I'm going to totally lose my range, but maybe everything else will work. What happened was I could still play as high, but I had no endurance and I had no accuracy whatsoever, man. I was like, what? Yeah. And honest to God, for me, that time, it took me 6 months till I got it back.
Really?
It did.
Are you sure? Come on.
This was 30 years ago. So it would probably be different today.
Yeah,
well,
it wouldn't take you that
like
long.
a couple of years ago, my wife and I, we celebrated our 30th anniversary, and we went for a month. And I took my little best brass practice mute and I played almost daily, maybe 5 days a week, 6 days, but maybe just like 15, 20 minutes a day. Mm-hmm. I got back home. I practiced one day, felt great, and I played lead in a band, mini big band show the next day, and I've never played that book better, or since, I should say. So I don't know.
But there's something to be said for recovery. I don't think we talk enough about structured recovery from playing at a high intensity for a while. I know when I finish this run of shows next week, I'm going to take a day off. I may take 2 days off because I know that I'm playing at Midwest Clinic with Las Vegas Academy of the Arts. So once again, it goes back to planning. So if you look at your calendar and you know what the ups and the downs are, I think it's important to put in some rest days, some recovery days for yourself, especially if you're primarily a lead player, or you have some long shows. You should. I mean, I think that's more than necessary to do that.
Paul and I often equate it to sports, sports people that are professional sport, even if you're not a professional sports star or whatever, they're really into that. My son was big into soccer, and they have all these, like, they get done with training and they go do ice baths so they can go do it again the next day, or they have certain days that they'll take off, certain days when they can't take off. And we don't really do that as trumpet players, and even less if you're a pianist or a violinist or something else, Mm-hmm. And sometimes I think also, just for me, and maybe you guys feel like this, but I'm just speaking for me. Sometimes I just need to get away from it and do that, fix this thing at the house, or work on my car, or take care of my yards, and just get my mind off it, get out in the fresh air. When I come back to it, I'm a little more excited about playing.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah. So Bijan, along the lines of recovery and rest and all that, I'm sure you've also been in a situation where you've not had, a day off, a luxury of taking that rest. I know for me, doing a lot of these Broadway shows, there's been times where we have 6 days a week of shows, but on the Monday we travel and we rehearse a new orchestra in the new city. Right. And then, so there's no day off, and that could go on for 5, 6 months, 12 months a year sometimes. So what do you do in a situation like that to keep your chops healthy?
Well, just like as anything else, as you know, there's different levels of intensity that we play at based on the situation that we're in. Usually a lot of these pit things, or things like that nature, you're mic'd and stuff like that, so you can really not back off, but you when you have enough experience with the book, when to put the pedal to the metal, and when you have to, and when you can just kind of let it come to you. So I think that's part of it, understanding how to pace yourself. And then and this goes back to planning again, right? It's interesting. It's amazing to me how many players, and I'm speaking more of the young players in my private studio or the collegiate level, about to graduate. They don't have a schedule. I'm like, it must be nice. I have to have a schedule. I have to know what's going on. But even to the next level, preparing for projects that are down the line. We can't just jump into things maybe we haven't played before, a book we haven't played before. So it really goes back to setting the time aside to understand how the book is going to impact your chops, and then making a schedule accordingly for that. Because you're right, sometimes you don't have the option. You don't really get a day off. And it also goes back to knowing your body too. I mean, as we get a little longer in the tooth, I know I look like I'm 25, but I'm only 30. He says with a not straight face. But you have to understand how your body's going to react to things. Guys make fun of me all the time on the bandstand. They're like, "Oh, there he is with his jugs of water on the bandstand." I'm like, yeah, I don't take a lot of like ibuprofen or Aleve or anything like that. I just drink an amazing amount of water and electrolytes following a show, and I find that works for me. Mm-hmm. Because once again, you want your body to respond in an organic and natural way in terms of recovery, so you can understand how your body is going to react.
And I think this is a point this is something that Paul and I preach a little bit. I mean, trumpet is very unique to each one of us, and you really, we like to say that we're not dogmatic in our approach. I mean, there are people like I studied with Stamp. I've studied the Bill Adams stuff. I've studied a little, a lot of things, but I'm not closed off to learning how other people have done it, so I can find what works best, for me. So like for you, for instance, like when you're gonna, you're taking a few days off now for the holiday and everything, but you're gonna ramp up and you're gonna get ready to prepare. I mean, you're gonna start preparing to do your shows. Mm-hmm. So now when you ramp up, as far as your practice schedule goes, let's say you practice 2-3 hours a day. Mm-hmm. How do you do that? How do you personally do that? Because some teachers are like, you got to sit down and do this exercises, play for 2 hours straight, and then take a break.
Well, I have my 30-minute pre-show warm-up that I do, 20 to 30 minutes. And then I have my 45-minute to an hour warm-up, which is probably a little more intensive. That's to start off the day. Like, let's say I have a double, like recently I had a double session in LA I had to do. So I knew it was going to be a long day. I knew I had to have a lot of flexibility. So I did my hour warm-up to start the day. And then I only did like my 15-20-minute warm-up prior to the session starting, get there early, of course, and warm up. And also I watch what I eat during the day too. It's interesting. I need to have a little bit of carbs before I play to keep my blood sugar up and stuff like that. As a lead player, you kind of have to have your blood sugar happening. Or else, I know a lot of guys do like a low carb keto diet and stuff like that or whatever, and they're wondering why they're passing out or why they feel, because their blood sugar is so low. Well, it's great for losing weight, but not so great if you're playing lead trumpet at high intensity and you've got to maintain this thing and your blood sugar is low and So I'll do my stamp hood exercise. I do that, and I do mouthpiece buzzing. And then I'll do my arpeggiated things, which Bobby Bryant Sr. taught me. These arpeggios I do with a tuner, always with a tuner and a metronome. And just to make sure everything's slotting, because, as every day is a little different. I wish I could say every day was perfect. Mm-hmm. But every day is a little different in terms of how the horn slots and the room, the way the room gives back to you, right? That's a huge thing. Mm-hmm. I played in some beautiful looking rooms, but the worst sounding in terms of not getting anything back. It's like you're playing into a sock, And so that is a huge thing, because as we play more, we're so attuned, no pun intended, to like the overtone series and getting some of that back, and that helps us project the sound based on what we're getting back. If we're not getting any response or reciprocal thing, then we have a tendency to do what? We overblow, right? So
Exactly.
it's pretty interesting, so you have to be aware of that. And so I have a lot of students, and the only way you can is by having these experiences, right? There's no substitute for that. I can tell you this so I'm talking about young students now, right? So you're blue in the face, but every room has a different situation. Every setting you do for your in-ear monitors is a different situation according to the room. All these different things, and there's no substitute for having that experience.
Yeah, we've all played too loud on a gig where we can't hear ourselves. Well, I've folded a couple of times when I was young because I just didn't get it, and nobody told me back then. And, I didn't have a teacher like you had, that talked about it too much. And then, but it is something Paul and I talk a lot about it,
It's interesting if you don't know where that line is that you shouldn't cross. There's no coming back from it, especially as a younger player.
It's out of the tube, man.
Yeah, there's no getting it back.
I always say it's like drinking. There's a line, and you can't cross that line, or else you're going to suffer for it the next day.
Well, and to Paul's point, it's like you don't know where that line is, and then when you hit, but when you've crossed it.
Yep.
You're like, I got, so then it's understanding how to be able to back off and make it through the rest of the show without, it's like, okay. But once again, that comes with understand. But see, I like where you said, Bobby, about being dogmatic. Well, you have to be dogmatic to a certain extent about how you approach your warm up and stuff, just so you understand how your body's going to respond for that time.
Yeah. But by that, I just meant, what I mean by that is like, is some people are so adamant that this is the way for everybody.
Yes, I understand.
Sometimes that doesn't always work for everybody.
I agree with you. Like I've been using, I got introduced to Flexus. I wasn't hip to that until I met O'Neill, John. Until I met him on a session. One of my former students was putting a big band album together, and so he was helping produce it. And he gave me a copy of the book, and I wasn't hip to it. I was like, "Oh, this is amazing!" And then buddy Mike Chickowitz gave me a copy of his dad's, the flow studies. I hadn't really done those. I'd done mostly Stamp, some Adams. But I hadn't really done, and it's like, oh wow, there's elements of this I can use for this too. So I that's a beautiful point, and I think we should be open to understanding how our playing can improve based on these exercises. Like for me, especially playing a lot of fast jazz lines and stuff like that, it's easy coming from a classical perspective, not understanding the level of flexibility you have to play some of those high tempo jazz lines, but it's a different approach, right? So understanding how that flexibility works versus, classical versus jazz versus a commercial setting. And so you can only achieve those things by having different exercises to pull from to be able to enhance those things.
That's a great point. Just knowing what works for you and what elements you used that term earlier. And that's a great one, is what elements to pull out of, the Flexus or the Jimmy Stamp or whatever to find out what works for you. And, what's interesting is that I don't know how it is for you guys, but for me, it changes, depending on what show I'm involved in. Right now, I happen to be doing a lot of Stamp stuff that, and I haven't really done much of that, but it seems to blend with the work that I'm doing right now, and it works. Whereas, another time it might be the Bill Adam routine. So do you find your routines change depending on what kind of workload you're doing as well?
It's interesting. That's a good point. I mean, for example, I have some stuff coming up in 2022 where I'm going to be doing more classical stuff, trumpet in front of a wind ensemble. So I've kind of switched up my not my warm up, but switched up some of the exercises I'm doing. I'm doing a little more of the Flexus stuff right now. And I'm doing, I mean, I've always done stamp. That's just something that's always felt good for me and helped, get my chops ready to respond. But I find myself doing a lot more Charlier type things right now that are focused on consistent, not necessarily loud, but consistent, resonant sound production. Because that's all I need to do. In a big band, I'm the first thing you hear usually. So there's a different level of intensity I'm playing at when I'm playing lead. But for a wind ensemble type situation, the ensemble is adjusting to me. So I have a lot more autonomy over how intense it has to be. So it's more about consistency and consistency of sound production and resonance and core of sound. So that I find has been helping me more to understand that, working on some Charlet stuff, bringing the Schlossberg back out, working on the evenness of tone and things like that. So,
well, and there's just stuff that slips a little bit when you don't focus on it because you're focusing on. I have that as well, and like something for me the other day, I actually busted out the Arbin's book, and in particular, just articulation studies for me. I just
triple tonguing for me. I busted it out for triple tonguing. I had some stuff.
Yeah, exactly, and interval studies, and
yes.
I just and in a day, in one session, maybe 2 days, boy, boom, it all came back. Right. And now everything's back on point, whereas it was kind of slipping there for a little bit. And it's a kind of for me, it proves to me personally that I don't have to be doing you really can't cover everything you need to cover every single day. And this is a fallacy, I think, that people believe, and they try to practice 6 or 8 hours a day and they wind up hurting themselves, but you can bounce around and touch on it when kind of sharpen the knife when it needs to be sharpened, I guess.
But the reason why I think, to your point about when you went to Arbin's and you hit some of those exercises that you had probably hit at some point before.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a cumulative effect. It's kind of like trying to cram for a test. You can't cram for it, but you can build sequentially over time. And I had this happen. I can remember in high school, college, I was working on the Eratunian trumpet concerto to do, and that pat, I swear I
played that on my senior recital. It's a
right, yeah, that's me too. Yeah, so I was I could not for the life of me, and this is probably November or whatever of the year before I was graduating, right? So I was preparing to play it in April or March or something like that. I said, okay, I got to step away from it. I came back a month later to it, came right out. So it's it's interesting how I think it's very psychosomatic how your body can respond to these things if you are taking a disciplined approach to how you're getting it. You may not get it at that time. But if you're focused on doing it properly, your body kind of will do the work, and the muscle memory will come, and it will kick in. But once again, you only can experience that if you're consistently working on it in the first place, right?
Yeah. Well, I should have prefaced it with that because I spent years.
But we all do. I mean, we've all been there, right? We've all been there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. One of the stupidest things for me, speaking of triple tonguing, double tonguing as well for me, when I was much younger, I would get pissed off at myself. And it was almost like a New Year's resolution where I go, damn it, this year I'm going to be good at this. And so I would spend a week and I would be practicing multiple tonguing for an hour every single day, for a month. And then my tongue would get so swollen, I could hardly talk. And I would be going, thugga, thugga, thugga. I could hardly get any speed. And so I go, well, this is stupid. It's ruining the rest of my playing. So well, maybe I'll work on it next year. and I never got any better until a friend of mine just said, a tiny little bit, and then I was doing a show, Spam-A-Lot, You know,
Yeah.
funny little show, but it had a little, you know, you know, like that. I just had to touch on it a tiny bit every single day, and there it is. You know, it was so much easier to do it in that tiny, like a little grain of salt is good, but you know, a mound of it is going to kill you, kind of thing.
But it's a cumulative, yeah, it's a cumulative effect.
It
And I
is,
think
yeah.
a lot of times we as trumpet players think we've got to figure it out right now or it's never going to happen.
Yeah.
And that's just not the case. It's consistency is the case. And I always tell
Right.
students all the time, what separates the pro player from the semi-pro player or the student is the level of consistency that they have in a show, on a performance. It's about consistency. And that, to me, that's the only difference. I mean, once you get to producing a good sound on the instrument, I mean, it's at that point, it's really how consistent you are about playing from that point forward. You know.
So I've got a question, maybe a leading question, because I think I know how you feel about this already. But because you play orchestral and jazz and lead, and you know, you cross over into a lot of different genres of music, do you feel that one actually benefits the other, or does one detract from the other? Like, for instance, playing classical, do you feel like that would harm your lead playing?
Absolutely not. It's interesting. I believe the classical training I had is the only reason why I am able to play lead in these jazz situations today, is because it goes back to understanding how the horn works, how to create sound on the instrument, how to play consistently. And that comes from classical training. I mean, I think a lot of times, a lot of players that, you know, primarily are playing jazz, they're so focused on playing the licks and transcribing, they really don't focus on sound production. Everyone's like, oh, I want to have my voice. I want to have, you know, well, your voice starts with how you sound. And a lot of playing the classical training that we go through involves just learning how to consistently create a sound on the instrument and understanding how to make those intervals, how to play in tune consistently. Once you have those types of elements and understanding how the horn works and how you want to sound, then you can add in all those other things. The notes are the same in jazz and classical, it's just how it's articulated. So if you don't have any command over the instrument, how can you do both? So I believe that the classical training is first and foremost, and you can play anything from that point, because then it's just a matter of how you're articulating. If I'm playing TOP stuff, then it's just a matter of how am I articulating those 16th notes. It's different than if I was playing, you know, the Hummel concerto or something like that. You know,
but wouldn't you say there is also a difference, you know, when you're playing classical music, of course, absolutely sound takes precedence and all that. But when you're playing something in some kind of high pop, kind of tower power kind of setting or whatever, like you're doing, you're talking about like a high compression type of playing you need to do. So there's a different type of an approach. I mean, I think there is.
Absolutely. But I'm saying you can't, I believe that you can't really understand how to approach those other things without understanding truly how your horn works, right?
Totally
or
agree.
Understanding that it's an additional compression is required to do that. Well, how am I going to create that for this situation without losing the integrity of my sound and the integrity of being able to play because it's interesting. A lot of people will say, well, I'm going to switch to a lead mouthpiece or whatever. And then they find they're not able to play with the same dexterity some of the lines that they were with their classical mouthpiece or whatever, right? So that's a whole nother rabbit hole. We won't go into that
today.
But yeah, so you know, you have to understand that, and I think you can't understand that if you haven't really taken command of how you are creating sound on your instrument. You know. To your point, Bob, you're right. I mean, it's a different compression. It's a whole different thing, right? Especially like when you do a lot of solo stuff, you get out in front of an orchestra, you get out in front of a band or whatever. It's a totally different thing than when you're sitting in a section. You have other band section mates that can help with the overtone series, and you kind of ride on top of it. You know, when you're out there naked to the world,
there's a whole lot more pressure on you, isn't there?
You know, so yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely.
Well, let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about your association with Stomvi and your gear, because I think that's kind of an interesting thing. And I think a lot of people would be interested in hearing about this.
Well, I've been playing Stomvi since 1998, 98, 99.
So
And
you go way back with them then.
yeah, I mean, I was playing on the Master Series horns, which have the interchangeable bells and interchangeable lead pipes, interchangeable tuning, crook and everything. And I have Charlie Davis to thank for that. I mean, at that time, he was a Stomvi artist as well, and they were looking for someone. And I had just started playing with Clayton Hamilton Jazz Orchestra at that time. We were about to start our residency at the Hollywood Bowl as the artists in residence there. So it was good timing. Before that, I played on the Yamaha. Canstel. I played on Canstel for a long time for commercial stuff, and of course the Bach 37, which to this day I'm mad that I sold. But anyway, that's a whole nother
The one
thing.
that got away, yeah.
The one that got away, right? And Canstel, and then Yamaha Flugel and stuff like that before I got the Stomvi. And I found with the Stomvi stuff, it was just really interesting to being able to make that master horn at that time allowed me the capability to kind of switch bells for when I was doing classical stuff versus doing commercial stuff. And I got the C trumpet. I have a master C trumpet, the master Flugel, the elite piccolo. So that's how that relationship began. At that time, they didn't have the mouthpiece system. I was playing on a Schilke 15. And that was the mouthpiece I used for everything. I was on a 1.5, and then I went to the Schilke 15, which is a little smaller, slightly than that. But and that was what I played on everything: classical, jazz, pop. And then about 12 years ago now, I switched to the Flex system, and that it brought my playing to a whole nother level in terms of the consistency in the upper register. If you don't know the Stomvi Flex system, it has the sleeves you can switch out to help reduce the gap in between where the receiver is. And I found that to work very well for me in what I was doing, just very responsive. And then I went to the VR2 big bell horn with their alloy, their special alloy they use, flex bell technology. And wow, I mean, the way that thing recorded and just responsive was fantastic. What I find interesting now is there's so many great horns out there now. I mean, at the time, Bach was going through a weird thing 15, 20 years ago. Let's be honest. I mean, Con Selmer guys probably don't want to talk about that, but, I talk about that with Rich Wetzel, Rich,
Yeah.
They were going through a weird thing. And actually, I play tested some of their commercial horns when they were coming up with them about 5-7 years ago. And now this new line that they have, the anniversary model or whatever, and the ones that Rashawn, they play pretty good. Yamaha went through a similar thing. I just couldn't get with their horns. I didn't feel it. It's new horns that the Yamahas come up in New Yorks and everything like that Wayne and those guys play on. They play great too. Mike Del Quadro, guy out of Vegas, makes some great horns. Of course, the Adams flugelhorn, I feel, is the best flugelhorn on the market in terms of just playability. Of course, you want the Shawgirl, those play great too, but I ain't got that kind of bread. So there's so many different options. But yeah, Stomvi is the one I play. I love them. They're great to me. They're super consistent. And I've been playing on the 4-valve B flat for a lot of my classical stuff now. And it's just an amazingly responsive horn. At first I was kind of like, what do I need a 4-valve B flat? Well, I started playing it, and I gotta say, it's pretty responsive. It's pretty. I'm very happy.
Valve, like a fourth below, like on a piccolo. Okay, yeah.
Yep, and that works. I mean, some of the cadenza stuff I do. I mean, I probably use it only 10% of the time, if necessary. But it also gives some interesting alternate fingerings when you're having to play some of these classical things that have these intervallic type stuff. It allows for you to do some interesting things there. So, I'm pretty happy with it.
Let me ask you a question just regarding your mouthpiece and switching between all the horns. Do you prefer to have the same rim all the time? Do you have that, or do you switch?
Yeah, the rim is the same, and then it's just a couple change, and usually it's not even the depth of the cup stays the same, but just the nature and the graduation of the cup will change slightly. And I find that works for me. For a while, I was switching. I had a classical mouthpiece that was considerably bigger, like almost like a 1. And it sounded great, but man, was I burnt, especially in some of these solo things I'm out, where you're playing with a quintet and the horn never comes off your face, a brass quintet or something.
Yeah.
So I had to rethink that. And then, so yes, I played around with that KO over at Stomvi USA, helped me find some. We decided, okay, let's keep the same rim and let's just try some different things with the cup and see how that works. And that helped maintain the endurance based on going, but still giving me that kind of resonance that's required to play with an organ or something like that, Easter versus, having a little more shimmer when I'm with Clayton Hamilton or in the pit orchestra or something like that.
Okay, very cool. Well, I know we're just about out of time here, so we're gonna shift gears one more time, and we're gonna do Paul. I'm gonna call an audible right now. We're gonna do a lightning round with Bijan here, and I'm gonna throw out.
Are you taking advantage of our friendship, Bobby?
I am. We're going to throw out a couple of questions to you just to see kind of where you're at, what you're into. I'm gonna throw this out right now. First one, what book are you reading right now?
The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday.
Smart people read. I can tell I know you're very, very smart, and I know you're very well read. So that proves it right there.
And the next one I'm reading is called Outliers.
Oh, I've read that.
Gladwell.
I love that book.
That's the next one. So, and I just finished The Art of Not Giving an F.
I read that too.
Great book. 5 a.m. Club was good too, but I read that back during the pandemic. I recommend that to my students in terms of getting a program together, getting really planning and thinking ahead. That really helped me get through the pandemic stuff was, when you're just kind of floating around, it's like, well, did I regroup? So anyway, that's what I'm reading.
We doing more lightning round? I don't know.
Yeah, you asked the next question.
Chocolate or vanilla ice cream? Which one?
Oh, that's a good question. See, I like ice cream with stuff in it. So like there's this dairy I grew up by my house, Crescent Ridge Dairy in Sharon, Mass. And they have this flavor called Cow Prince, which is basically like a fudge swirl with like nuts and stuff like that in it. So I'll go with, we'll say chocolate.
What's one of your very favorite cities to tour in when you've been on your tours around the world? Which is one of your favorites?
Okay, so internationally, it's got to be Vienna. Vienna is just great. People sleep on it. It's great food, great beer. So that international is top. Although I'm a huge fan of Spain. So, like, I don't know if you've been to the Basque region there, like Bayonne, like in the south of France, and like Biarritz. Love that area too. Domestically, I would say Chicago.
All right, interesting.
There, I love getting some steak there. Very food centric. I think but also for just chilling. But you asked on tour, right? Like for just in terms of hanging and chilling. I love Key West. I don't know if you've ever been out there. It's pretty amazing, yeah.
Yeah,
well, that gives us a little insight into Bijon Watson here. So thank you, man, for being here with us and taking time out of your busy day. I know we're all busy. I got to go pick up my son from the airport, and I know you got to go get yours as well.
Tell him I said hello, man.
Yeah, I will. And
Good kid, good kid. Yeah.
for everybody, you can check out Bijan at bijonwatson.com, and you can check out Stomvi at stomvi-usa.com. We'll put those in the link below. And thanks again for being here with us. We really appreciate you, and glad to have you in the group, man. It's really,
Hey,
really
thank
a
you so
pleasure to
much.
see you.
Great. Thanks for inviting me, and look forward to hopefully hanging in person real soon somewhere down the line.
Absolutely. We'll have to
Let me
do
know when
part
you come to
two.
Boston again, Paul. We'll hang out. Give me a call, please.
You got it. I'm looking forward to it. You
Go get
bet.
some pizza, man. We'll go to get some Regina Pizzeria.
Oh, Regina's, yes.
Yeah. See, now you're talking.
Okay, man. Thanks so much. We'll see you
Hey,
next
thank you,
time.
guys.
Appreciate it.
Have a great holiday, all right?
You
Happy
too.
holidays to you too.
Be well. Be safe.
All right.
Cool. Goodbye.